The guard was walking the old man to the exit to the sound of applause. Someone in the line had actually started clapping, a young guy in an expensive jacket, filming the whole thing on his phone. And a couple of people joined in, laughing. The old man didn't resist. He walked in with a slight limp toward the glass doors of Grace National, branch number 1 on Maple Street, and the only thing he allowed himself was to turn around once and look at the hall. Not at the manager who was throwing him out. At the hall, at the marble floor, at the columns, at the brass plaque by the entrance, darkened by 40 years of touching hands. Now, rewind 20 minutes. The old man had walked into the branch at 10 in the morning. He wore a coat that had been a good coat some 15 years ago, shoes polished but old, and a hand-knitted scarf, the kind nobody knits anymore. In his hands, he carried a worn leather folder. He took his place in line, waited patiently for 15 minutes, and reaching the window, said quietly, "Good morning. I need help with my late wife's account. I don't understand these new procedures very well. And also," he laid the folder on the counter, "I'd like to make a deposit." The teller, middle-aged with a tired mouth, glanced sideways at the coat and sighed loudly enough to be heard through the glass. "Estate documents, death certificate, your ID, all originals. And our deposits start at $5,000, Grandpa." "Do you have $5,000? "I do," the old man said calmly. "A little more than that." He opened the folder. Inside lay papers, neat, sorted into files, in a thick envelope. The line behind him began to hum. Time was passing, and 2 windows out of 6 were open. "Cash, no less," someone said from behind. "Pops, this is a bank, not a passbook office. The 80s are over," snickering. The old man didn't turn around. The teller leafed through his papers with the air of a person who is not paid enough, then jabbed a finger. "There's no Form 210-B here. Without it, I'm not even looking at this." "I'm sorry. Which form?" "On the phone, they told me it was enough to—" "Sir," a voice from behind the teller's shoulder. "What's the holdup?" The floor manager approached the window. Bradley Crossman, 32, a suit sharp off the rack of ambition, a smile off a billboard. He looked the old man up and down, the coat, the shoes, the scarf, and his smile became that particular smile the masters of the world bestow on those who, in their opinion, are wasting the world's time. "Right, I see," he said, not lowering his voice. "Sir, listen to me carefully. This is Grace National, a respectable bank for respectable clients. There's a line. People with money are waiting, and you're here with your—" With 2 fingers, he lifted the corner of the envelope. "Funeral savings. Social services is 2 blocks down. The shelter is on 7th. Nobody here can help you." "Young man," the old man said still quietly, "I am a client of this bank. A very old client. Check your system before you—" "Grandpa," Bradley leaned in closer and began to speak slowly as if to a deaf man. "I don't care who you were under Nixon. Right now, you are holding up my line and smelling of mothballs in my hall. In 1 minute, I'm calling security." "This is not your hall," said the old man. Something in his tone made Bradley falter for a second, but only a second. Careerists don't know how to hear. That space in them is occupied by ambition. "Security!" Bradley straightened up and waved his hand. "Escort the gentleman out and flag him in the system. Unwanted visitor." That was when the guy in the expensive jacket started filming and then applauding. The hall laughed. Not all of it, but loudly enough. The security guard, an older man with an unhappy face, took the old man by the elbow, gently ashamed of his own hand, and led him toward the doors. And then a voice rang out, "Stop! Just stop!" From behind the far window, the 6th one unremarkable, against the wall, a young woman of about 25 came running, a badge reading Emily Trainee, hair in a hastily made bun, desperate eyes. She rounded the line and planted herself between the guard and the door. "Sir, forgive us, please." She turned to the old man. "I will serve you. My break is in 2 minutes. I'll serve you on my break. It's not against the rules, I checked. Form 210-B. I'll fill out for you myself. It takes 5 minutes. It was discontinued 6 months ago. There's just an old regulation still sitting in the system. She threw a quick glance at Bradley and finished quieter, but finished. And nobody bothered to read the update. The hall went quiet. Bradley turned around slowly. Trainee Parker. Are you serious right now? He needs help with his late wife's account, Mr. Crossman. Her voice was shaking, but she stood. That is our job. Helping. That's what the plaque says by the entrance. A bank for people. He is people. You know what, Parker? Bradley smiled his billboard smile, and there was nothing good in it. You're fired right now for insubordination, for leaving your workstation, and honestly, just because I can. Turn in your badge at the desk. Security, we're escorting two now. Emily Parker stood in the middle of the marble hall, 25 years old, 3 months into her traineeship, a rented room and her mother's medical bills in her purse, and understood that she had just lost the job she had spent 6 months looking for. She looked at the old man. The old man looked at her. It's okay, she told him, and smiled crookedly. Come on, I'll at least walk you to social services. It really is close. And that stupid form, any branch is obligated to. What is your name? Asked the old man. Your full name. Emily Parker. The old man nodded, slowly as if writing the name down somewhere very deep. Walter, he introduced himself and offered his hand. A pleasure, Miss Parker. You have no idea how much of one. They walked out together, to Snickers, to the clicking of a camera, past the guy in the expensive jacket who was already uploading the video with the caption, Old man and trainee girl got thrown out of the bank, LOL. The brass plaque by the entrance trembled as the door swung shut. Grace National, a bank for people, established 1985. Outside, the old man stopped, looked at the plaque, and said something quietly. What? Emily didn't catch it. I said 40 years, Walter repeated. 40 years ago, I mounted that plaque with these two hands. Come along, Miss Parker. Coffee's on me. We have things to talk about. The coffee shop was small, across the street from the bank, and Emily ordered the cheapest Americano, while Walter ordered tea and 2 slices of apple pie without asking. I'm not hungry, Emily lied. And I wasn't born under Nixon, said Walter. I was born under Truman, and I've since learned to see when a person hasn't had breakfast. Eat, Miss Parker. The fired are entitled to pie. It's an old banking rule. She laughed unexpectedly for the first time that insane morning, and ate the pie in 4 minutes. Walter drank his tea and watched her eat, and there was something in his gaze that made you want to sit up straighter. Tell me, he said when the plate was empty. Why a bank? You're young, sharp, judging by the fact that you know the regulations better than your manager. You could have picked something more fun. And Emily, from exhaustion, from adrenaline, from the fact that for some reason she wanted to tell things to this old man in the old coat, told him about the finance college she'd finished by correspondence because full-time she couldn't afford, about her mother whose kidney disease had been diagnosed 3 years ago, and about the dialysis the insurance didn't fully cover, about the 2 jobs, the bank by day, warehouse invoices by night, about the fact that she'd gone into banking not even for the money, but because of her grandfather. He'd been a teller in a small town all his life, and used to say that a bank is the place people bring what matters most to them, and that working there is therefore an honor. He used to say, when a person puts money on the counter, they're putting their life there. Behave accordingly. Emily turned the empty cup in her hands. Funny, right? These days you get fired for that. Grace National introduced a prioritization policy this year. Clients are sorted into categories by account balance, and service time is allocated. In short, if you have less than 10,000, you're category D, and by internal instruction, you're entitled to no more than 4 minutes. 4 minutes, do you understand? And ours is an old neighborhood. It's all retirees. They've been trained to come in and apologize. To apologize for coming into the bank where they deposited their wages for 40 years. Who introduced this policy? Walter's voice didn't change, but he set his tea down. The regional director, Hartford, Victor Hartford. He's our star. Raised branch performance by a third in 2 years. He came by recently, gathered the whole floor, said, "A bank is not a charity. We serve capital, not nostalgia." Bradley took notes, standing up. She smirked. "Sorry, why would you care? You've already received your share of our service today." "Because I'm old and curious." Walter paused. "Miss Parker, one last question. You knew you'd be fired. I saw it. You knew while you were still running across that floor." "Why did you run?" Emily shrugged and didn't answer right away. "My mom collapsed in line at a pharmacy once. She felt sick, and everyone just stood and watched. Because it's awkward. Because there's a line. Because it's not their business. One woman came over, 1 out of 15. She looked out the window at the bank across the street. I promised myself then that I'd be the one. That's the whole math of it. Grandpa would understand. Mom will understand. My landlady, unlikely, but that's my problem." Walter Grace looked at her for a long time. Then he took a phone from his inner pocket, and Emily was startled. The phone was not an old man's phone. It was thin, latest model, strange-looking, in the hand of a man in a 15-year-old coat. "I need to make one call," he said. "Forgive me, it's a short one." He stepped outside. Through the glass, Emily watched him talk, briefly, calmly, looking at the bank building across the street. If she could have heard him, she would have heard the following. "Margaret, good afternoon. This is Walter." "Yes, that Walter. Don't fall off your chair. I know it's been 6 years. Listen to me carefully. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. An extraordinary meeting of the board. Full attendance, including Hartford. The agenda, audit of client policy. The reason is that I've decided so. That has always been sufficient. And one more thing, Margaret. Pull everything for me on branch number 1 on Maple Street. Personnel files, internal instructions, especially a certain prioritization policy, and everything Victor Hartford has signed in 2 years. And the floor camera footage from today, 10 to 10:30. No police. This is a family matter." He came back, sat down, finished his cooled tea. "Miss Parker, I have a proposal for you. Tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning, please come to the Grace National head office. The tower on Commerce Street, you know it? Ask at reception for Mr. Grace. They'll show you up." Mr. Emily blinked. "Like the bank?" "Like the bank." Walter rose and picked up his worn folder. "There's a chance your work situation can be corrected. I still have some connections in that organization. I promise no mountains of gold, but you will be heard." "Walter." Emily looked up at him, and something began slowly, impossibly assembling itself in her head. The plaque. "I mounted it with these 2 hands. The latest model phone. Ask for Mr. Grace." "What's your last name?" The old man smiled. For the first time all day, truly, and the smile took 20 years off him. "Tomorrow, Miss Parker. Everything tomorrow." He laid a bill on the table, covered it with the saucer, and headed for the door. At the door he turned. "And thank you. Today you did more for that bank than its entire board of directors has done in 6 years. It's just that nobody knows it yet." The door closed. Emily sat over her empty cup, looked across the street at the brass plaque. Grace National, a bank for people, established 1985, and suddenly realized she hadn't asked the main thing. What was in his worn folder? And why an ordinary old man in an old coat had come today to the meanest branch in the city, on foot, with cash, as if deliberately asking for what had happened. As if deliberately. Emily Parker slowly set down her cup. "No way," she said out loud to the empty coffee shop. At 8:55 in the morning, the board of directors of Grace National was buzzing like a hive someone had thrown a rock into. 12 people at the long table on the 40th floor of the Commerce Street Tower were tossing around the same question. Who had called the meeting? Margaret, the board's eternal secretary, answered every inquiry identically. Full attendance, 9 sharp, audit of client policy. Victor Hartford, 51, a gray suit, a reputation as a human calculator, sat calmer than anyone. An audit of client policy meant a conversation about performance, and performance was his fortress. At 9 sharp, the doors opened, and into the room walked an old man in a coat that had been a good coat some 15 years ago. For several seconds, there was a silence of a particular kind. The silence of 12 adults simultaneously trying to reconcile a face from their memory with the face in the doorway. The first to stand was the oldest of the directors, gray-haired Cunningham. Good God, Walter. Good morning, Jim. Walter Grace walked to the head of the table, to the chair that had stood empty for 6 years because no one had ever quite dared to take it, and sat down. Please, everyone, be seated. My apologies for the suddenness. For 6 years, I did not interfere. The board governed. I didn't get in the way. That was my decision after Rose died, and I don't regret it. But yesterday I ran an experiment, and its results require your attention. Margaret, the footage. On the screen appeared the floor of branch number 1 on Maple Street. The marble, the line. An old man in a coat at the teller's window. The board watched for 20 minutes, uncut, in full. The teller sighing through the glass. The line snickering about Nixon and mothballs. Bradley Crossman lifting the corner of the envelope with 2 fingers and pronouncing, "Funeral savings, smelling of mothballs in my hall. The shelter is on 7th. The security guard walking the founder of the bank to the doors to applause. And the one trainee in the entire hall running across the marble and planting herself between security and the old man. And being fired just because I can." When the recording ended, you could hear the air conditioning. "For the record," Walter said evenly, "yesterday in the branch I opened with my own hands 40 years ago, I was flagged as an unwanted visitor. Not because I was disturbing the peace, because I was wearing this coat." He laid his hands on the table. "Now a question for the board. How did this become possible?" And I have the answer. Margaret, the document. On the screen appeared an internal instruction. Client flow prioritization policy. Categories A, B, C, D. Account balances. Time standards. Signature, V. Hartford. 4 minutes, said Walter. "Victor, do I understand correctly? A person who carried their wages into our bank for 40 years and now lives on a pension is entitled by your instruction to 4 minutes? And then they are to be, how does the appendix put it, gently redirected to digital channels." Hartford didn't flinch. Human calculators don't flinch. They recalculate. "Mr. Grace, with the deepest respect for you and for the history of this bank, I will answer with numbers because there is no other language in this business. In 2 years of the policy, the network's operating costs are down 19%. Retail profitability is up by 1/3. The board saw these numbers and approved them quarterly." He swept his gaze around the table, and a few people lowered their eyes. "Category D is 8% of revenue and 41% of operational load. I did not forbid serving these people. I forbade serving them at a loss. What happened to you personally yesterday is one manager's excess, one man's rudeness, and he will be punished. But do not, I ask you, substitute a personnel question for a question of strategy. The strategy works." "It works," Walter agreed, "depending on what you pointed at." Margaret, next slide. On the screen appeared charts Hartford had never seen, pulled overnight from the depths of the reporting system on the founder's direct order. Attrition of clients over 60 across the network, up 240% in 2 years. Closed accounts with histories longer than 20 years, 11,000. Average client lifespan for those acquired under the new strategy, 1 year and 7 months, against 23 years for the ones being gently redirected. You sold the foundation and called it growth, Victor. Walter spoke without anger, which made it worse. Category D people are not 8% of revenue. They are the reason this bank was believed in for 40 years. Belief doesn't show up in a quarterly report. Only its disappearance does with a 5-year lag, when it's already too late. I built a bank where the security guard knew depositors by name. You built a bank where the founder gets walked. You sold the foundation and called it growth, Victor. Walter spoke without anger, which made it worse. Category D people are not 8% of revenue. They are the reason this bank was believed in for 40 years. Belief doesn't show up in a quarterly report. Only its disappearance does, with a 5-year lag when it's already too late. I built a bank where the security guard knew depositors by name. You built a bank where the founder gets walked out by the elbow. Your 19% of costs is the price of the plaque by the entrance. You took it down and sold it for scrap. That is sentiment, Mr. Grace, Hartford said quietly. That is capital, Mr. Hartford. You simply don't know how to count it. Walter turned to the board. Gentlemen, I am returning, temporarily, until the completion of a full audit of client policy and the personnel decisions that follow from it. The bylaws give me that right. Margaret will confirm the clause. We will vote nonetheless. I've been a guest in my own house for 6 years. I've grown used to knocking. The vote was open, 11 in favor. Hartford abstained, and it was the loudest abstention in the history of that room. At 9:31, there was a knock, and Margaret ushered into the boardroom a young woman in her only decent blazer, with a hastily gathered bun and eyes that grew wider with every step. The long table, 12 suits, the screen frozen on a still of yesterday's banking floor, and at the head of the table, in the founder's chair, an old man in a familiar coat. Miss Parker, said Walter Grace, rising to meet her. Come in, don't be afraid. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Emily Parker, trainee at branch number 1. Yesterday, she was the only employee in a network of 1,400 who did her job, for which she was fired. He held the pause. From this minute until the end of the audit, Miss Parker works with me. As a consultant on the one subject she understands better than anyone in this building. On what subject? Someone asked. On Category D, people, said Walter. She is the only one here who remembers that it is not a category, it is people. Emily stood in the middle of the boardroom, looked at the old man from the coffee shop, and finally asked her question. Quietly with her lips only, but he read it. Grace, is that you? Walter nodded and pointed her to the chair beside his own. Walter and Emily spent Wednesday in the archive and on banking floors. He insisted the audit begin not with documents but with visits. 3 branches in one day, unannounced, through the back door. Emily showed him what can't be seen from the tower. The tablets by the entrance where old people who couldn't use them were gently redirected. The 4-minute standard living inside a timer on the teller screen, with a red glow as it ran out. The bonuses tied to digital channel conversion, because of which the tellers, not cruel, just worn down, with their own dialysis bills, herded grandmothers toward the tablets like cattle. You have to understand, they're not monsters, Emily said in the car between branches. Lenora, the one who sighed at you through the glass. She has 2 kids and a mortgage, and if her digital conversion number drops, she loses a quarter of her pay. The system pays her not to be a person. Bradley, he's the genuine article. That one's by vocation. But the rest are just surviving inside an instruction. Walter listened, looked out the window, and now and then wrote something in a small notebook, by hand, in slow, old-fashioned script. Rose always said the same thing, he said suddenly, in different words. There are no cruel tellers, Walter. There are cruel rules. She worked the counter herself for the first 7 years, in that very first branch. I built the bank. She made it human. Then she was gone, and I left because I couldn't look at those walls. He closed the notebook. 6 years I couldn't, and I should have done the opposite, kept my eyes open. While I was nursing my grief, they switched off her half of the bank. Mine they kept. The columns, the marble, the reporting. Hers, the people, they switched off as surplus. Emily was silent. Then she asked quietly, On Monday at Maple Street, you didn't just walk in, did you? You were testing. I received a letter, said Walter, a month ago, from the widow of my first security guard. Remember I told you, the one who knew depositors by name. She wrote that she had been ushered out of our bank in 4 minutes without being allowed to withdraw the money for her husband's funeral. That she felt ashamed. She felt ashamed. He paused. I didn't believe it. More precisely, I didn't want to believe it. Those are different verbs, Miss Parker, and the second one is more shameful. So I put on the old coat and went to check for myself. The worst part of that day was not being walked out. The worst part was standing in that line and seeing, to everyone around, this was normal. Nobody was surprised, except one trainee who was foolish enough to remain a human being in front of her management. "I've been told that before," Emily smiled. "In different words, granted." "I don't doubt it." Walter looked at her. "Tomorrow the auditors will be at your former branch. I'm going with them. I want to ask Mr. Crossman a few questions personally, this time, so to speak, in the correct coat. Will you come with me?" Emily pictured Bradley's face. She tried very hard to keep her own face professionally neutral. It didn't work. "With pleasure, Mr. Grace," she said honestly. On Thursday at 10 a.m. sharp, Walter Grace walked into branch number 1 on Maple Street through the front door, in the same coat. That was a matter of principle. Margaret had suggested a suit. The auditors had suggested the back entrance. The head of security had suggested arriving before opening. Walter rejected all of it. "I will come in what I came in. Through the same doors, at the same hour. A bank must be able to look any coat in the eye. Otherwise, it's not a bank, it's a dress code with deposits." The only difference was the escort. Behind the old man in the worn coat walked 4 auditors with briefcases, a lawyer, Emily Parker in her only blazer, and silence. The silence walked ahead of them all. The floor recognized him instantly. The whole city had seen the video by now, and the line, the same line Thursday had merely changed the faces in it, parted like water. Bradley Crossman was waiting by the entrance. He had been waiting since 6 a.m., suit pressed to a crunch, smile rehearsed to a spasm, speech learned by heart. He stepped forward. "Mr. Grace, sir, what an enormous honor for our branch. On behalf of the entire team, I would like to offer our deepest—" "Form 210-B, said Walter. "The apologies for—" Bradley stumbled. "I'm sorry, what?" "Form 210-B, Walter looked at him calmly. "On Monday, your employee refused me service for lack of form. 210-B. I am an old man, Mr. Crossman. I came prepared. Here it is." He drew a sheet from the worn folder. "Filled out. Tell me, as floor manager, what is this form?" Bradley stared at the sheet. The auditors stared at Bradley. The line held its breath. "It's the form confirming source of funds in estate transactions. It was discontinued 6 months ago," said Walter, "by a head office circular which your branch received, logged, and did not read. Trainee Parker knew that in her 3rd month on the job. You do not know it in your 4th year. On Monday, you expelled a client by citing a non-existent piece of paper. And that, mind you, was still the lawful part of your day. After that, the personal improvisations began." He turned to the hall and raised his voice slightly. "For the first time, ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for holding up the line for exactly 4 minutes. I'm told that's the standard here." A nervous laugh ran through the hall. Bradley stood the color of the marble. "Mr. Grace, that day I didn't recognize you. If I had known who you were—" "There," said Walter. "There it is. Stop right there, Mr. Crossman. You have just said the most important thing, and I want the hall to hear it. If I had known who you were," he turned to the line, "he would have acted differently, with a billionaire, which means with a pensioner he acted correctly. Ladies and gentlemen, remember that formula. It explains everything that has happened to this place. Here they learned to serve the balance on the account. The person who brought it, they stopped seeing." He stepped up close to Bradley, went on, "to the distance from which on Monday he had been told about mothballs, and said quietly, for him alone, 'You're fired, Mr. Crossman. Not for insulting me. I'm old, I'll survive. For the formula. For if I had known. People with that formula cannot be allowed near people. And one more thing. On Monday you said, 'my hall.' Well, now you know whose hall it is. It's mine. And I know whose it really is." Walter nodded toward the line. "Theirs. Has been for 40 years. Turn in your badge at the desk. You know the wording. You used it recently yourself." Bradley Crossman walked across the marble toward the security desk, and a phone in someone's hand was already filming, and nobody applauded. Walter turned at the first clap and shook his head, and the clap died. Humiliation was not the point. Precision was. Then Walter approached the teller's window. That same one. Lenora sat behind the glass, white, hands in her lap. Mr. Grace, I, that day I, that day you worked according to an instruction that fines you for being humane, said Walter. I've read your bonus scheme, Mrs. Ortiz. A quarter of your pay riding on digital conversion. 2 children, a mortgage. I will not punish you for choosing your children. I will be changing the instruction so that you never again have to choose. He laid his worn folder on the counter. And now, if you'll allow me, I am, after all, a client. I need help with my late wife's account. Account number 1. In the literal sense, the first account ever opened in this bank. June of 1985. Rose Grace. She sat behind this window for 7 years. Perhaps someone has told you. Take your time, Mrs. Ortiz. Today the timer is off. Lenora Ortiz took the papers with trembling hands and worked for 40 minutes, and no one in the line said a word, because the line was watching history being made. And at that same hour, 40 floors up in the tower on Commerce Street, Victor Hartford was finishing a meeting with his lawyer, and on the desk between them lay the board minutes for 2 years and a fresh analytical memo with a title that breathed patience. Operating cost projection upon cancellation of the prioritization policy. Horizon, 2 quarters. Let the old man fire managers and switch off timers, said Hartford, closing the folder. Every beautiful gesture of his costs money, and the money is counted not by the line on Maple Street. The money is counted by the board. In January, there will be a report, and in reports, David, there is no column for sentiment. He was wrong about exactly one thing, and he would learn of that mistake in 2 months. There was a column in the reports that he had never once read. For 2 months, Walter Grace and Emily Parker rebuilt the bank at a speed nobody expected from a 71-year-old man. The categories were abolished in the first week. The timers came off the screens, physically, with a screwdriver, and the first one Walter unscrewed himself, in branch number 1, in front of a camera that this time was not brought by a mocking bystander. The press now followed him everywhere. The bonus scheme was rewritten. Instead of digital conversion, client retention and problems actually solved. Emily invented a simple metric that the auditors turned over for a week and could find nothing to fault. Did the person come back voluntarily? In every branch, 1 window, the 6th against the wall, was made slow. No standards for those who needed time. The sign for it, Walter worded personally, "This window works for as long as you need." The old people didn't believe it at first. Then they believed it all at once. The video, meanwhile, lived its own life. Bank manager throws out billionaire founder was watched by 11 million people. And the sequel, the founder returned and fired the manager, by twice that. But the real wave came from a third clip, filmed by someone in the line on a phone. An old man in a worn coat sits at a teller's window and says, "Take your time, Mrs. Ortiz. Today the timer is off." 5 words, "Today the timer is off," became a meme, then a headline, then something like a folk slogan that people wrote on sticky notes and pasted onto other banks' ATMs. And then came the thing that appeared in none of Victor Hartford's analytical memos. People started bringing money, not just the old. The old simply came back. The 11,000 closed accounts began reopening, 300 a day. Everyone brought money. 30-year-olds tired of being a category in somebody's spreadsheet. Small businesses exhausted by call centers. Parents opening children's savings accounts at the bank where they don't throw you out. The deposit inflow over 2 months amounted to a figure the chief financial officer recalculated 3 times before putting it in the report. Because organic growth like that the network had not seen since the 90s. Hartford looked at the preliminary data in December and disbelieved it professionally. Sentiment does not convert. That was a law of his universe. He waited for January the way one waits for a verdict that is obliged to be an acquittal. The January board meeting ran 40 minutes, and for 30 of them, the numbers did the talking. The chief financial officer reported in a level voice, but the levelness cost him effort. Operating costs, yes, up by 7%. Mr. Hartford had projected 12. Client attrition halted for the first time in 2 years. New account inflow, up 260% year over year. The deposit base, up 4.1 billion in 2 months. Client acquisition cost down ninefold because clients were being acquired not by advertising, but by 5 words from a viral clip. And in a separate line, which the chief financial officer read out with visible pleasure, 3 competing banks had announced within a month a review of client service standards. The market was scrambling to catch up. In sum, he finished, if we count belief the way Mr. Grace proposed, with a lag, the lag turned out to be not 5 years, but 5 weeks. Forgive the sentiment. There's none in the report. The report is all numbers. The board was silent. Everyone looked at Hartford. Victor Hartford was a human calculator, and that was his strength, and that also proved to be his end. A calculator cannot argue with the total. He could have grasped at things, methodology, seasonality, novelty effects. He had sat over the data all night looking for something to grasp. And, being an honest counter, had found exactly one thing. My model was wrong, he said. The room went very quiet. And I treated trust as a constant, Hartford continued, looking not at the board but into his papers, as background that is always there and can be loaded with costs. Mr. Grace treated it as an asset, a variable that grows when you invest in it and dies when you economize on it. His model showed better convergence with reality. In my profession, this is called losing correctly. He closed his folder and stood. My resignation has been with Margaret since 8 this morning. One request, Mr. Grace, a personal one. I'm listening, Victor. The column, said Hartford. In December, you told my lawyer, and lawyers, as we know, pass everything along, that there is a column in the reports I have never read. I have reread every form. I did not find it. What column? Walter Grace rose from his seat, walked over, and laid a sheet in front of him. A standard account opening form, the one the bank had been printing for 40 years. Second line from the top, he said. You have read it 1,000 times and never once read it. It says name, not balance, not category. Name, Victor. Every document of ours begins with it, and so does our entire business. For 40 years, all I ever did was take that column seriously. Hartford looked at the form for a long time. Then he folded it in half, put it in his inner pocket. For some reason, nobody asked what reason, nodded and walked out. The door closed. Jim Cunningham broke the silence first. Walter, the board is obliged to ask. You return temporarily until the completion of the audit. The audit is complete. What now? Walter Grace looked out the window, 40 floors down, at the city where, at that minute, in 120 of his branches, 120 slow windows were working against the wall. Now I am 71 years old, Jim, and I would like to do some living, he said. The bank doesn't need me. The bank needs a person who will take that column as seriously. I have a candidate, and the board will not like her. At first. And then you will remember that 30 years ago you didn't like me in exactly the same way. Who? Asked Cunningham. Walter smiled. Give her 2 years and a good mentor, he said. The mentor, so be it, will be found. Old, stubborn, in a decent coat. I finally bought a decent one. Rose would have approved. And now, gentlemen, I have a meeting 1 floor down. My consultant on people and I are designing a program for employees, family medical coverage, including, he glanced into his notebook, though he knew it by heart, including dialysis. It turns out our tellers have a name column too. Who would have thought? That the program had been named the Rose Grace Fund, Emily learned from the order. That the first line of coverage was dialysis, from its appendix, and what she herself was to become, on Friday evening in the empty branch number 1 on Maple Street, where Walter had invited her to sign a couple of papers. He was waiting by the 6th window, the slow one. On the counter lay a thin folder and stood 2 cups of tea from the coffee shop across the street. Have a seat, Miss Parker. On the other side, please, behind the glass. Why behind the glass? Because my wife worked behind this window for 7 years and I am superstitious. Important things in this bank should happen right here. He slid the folder toward her. Read aloud if you like. I'm old. It does me good to hear good news twice. Emily opened the folder. The first sheet was an order enrolling her in the Grace National Senior Leadership Development Program. 2 years, individualized, with a mentor. In the mentor field, it said, W. Grace, founder. The second sheet was a personal letter to the board, dated January, the one she had known nothing about. I recommend preparing E. Parker for the position of chief executive of the network. Grounds, the only employee out of 1,400 whose understanding of banking coincides with the company's charter. Verified personally, twice. Once in an old coat, once in a new one. Emily raised her eyes. This is a joke? This is a personnel decision, said Walter. The joke happened on Monday when I was being walked out to applause, and the entire hall stood silent. That was the joke. A bad one, a long one. I allowed it to run for 6 years. And you are the correction to it. The board approved the program yesterday. Jim Cunningham asked whether it troubled me that you are 25 and 3 months out of your traineeship. I answered that the opposite would trouble me. People who haven't been ruined by 10 years of the system must be caught before 10 years of the system can ruin them. Mr. Grace, I just ran across a floor. Anyone would have. No, said Walter, and for a second the softness left his voice. Not anyone. There were 40 people standing in that hall, Miss Parker, and the one who ran was you. 1 out of 40. Your mother told you about 1 out of 15. The national statistics are deteriorating, as you can see, which makes the exceptions more valuable. He slid the pen toward her. Sign, and turn to the last page. There's a clause there which is, in fact, the reason I'm superstitious. The last page was a statement for account number 1, Rose Grace, June 1985. Walter had never closed it. For all 6 years, a modest sum had sat there, and now a standing order had been attached to the account. Its interest annually and in perpetuity would fund a named scholarship for employees who placed themselves between an injustice and a person. The scholarship was called simply 1 out of 40. She would have loved you, said Walter, watching Emily read the page twice. Rose, all her life she said that banks weren't invented for money. They were invented for peace of mind. Money is just the mechanism. People bring their fear of tomorrow through these doors, and our work is to take in the fear and pay out the calm. The exchange rate is human decency. Everything else is superstructure. He finished his tea. Signed? Excellent. Then one last thing for today from your mentor. Tomorrow is Saturday, and you are going to your mother's. That is an instruction, not a suggestion. You will tell her that the dialysis is now covered in full, with a separate commendation in the order. I wrote the wording myself. Don't ruin it by reading it off a phone. Take the paper copy, and you will also tell her, he thought for a second, tell her that the woman who came over to her in that pharmacy, the 1 out of 15, raised a very correct daughter. The circle has closed, Miss Parker. At my age, you begin to notice that they always do. It's just that some of them have a very long radius. After that, time moved the way time moves in stories where everything is finally in its place. Lenore Ortiz became the manager of branch number 1. Her first directive was to hang a bigger sign over the 6th window. The widow of the old security guard Walter tracked down personally. He drove out, apologized on the bank's behalf, brought papers. Her banking would be handled, from now on, indefinitely and without waiting in line. And her letter, the one that had started everything, now hung framed in the founder's office next to Rose's portrait. The complaint that saved the bank, read the caption, and Walter had insisted on precisely the word complaint. Let every director remember what the most valuable documents are called. Bradley Crossman found a job at a competing bank, the very one that had been first to announce a review of client service standards, and rumor had it, opened every staff meeting with the words, "The client is a person." The rumors were hard to believe, but miracles, as that year had shown, did happen. The video of his firing was watched to the end by a record share of viewers. The top comment consisted of 6 words. Today the timer is off, baby. Victor Hartford sent Walter a letter 6 months later. Paper, handwritten. He was teaching a risk management course at a business school now, and in his opening lecture he dissected one case study, the constant error, how I failed to see the largest asset on the balance sheet, Enclosed with the letter was a copy of that same form, the second line circled in red. I show it to students in the first class, Hartford wrote. I tell them, read it. They read name and don't understand. By December, they understand. Thank you for the most expensive lesson of my career. In both senses of the word expensive. And 2 years later, in June, people gathered at branch number 1 on Maple Street, the board in full, the press, Lenora with her whole team, Emily's mother in a new dress, and Walter Grace, in the decent coat he had never learned to love, drew the cloth off the renewed brass plaque by the entrance. Grace National, a bank for people, established 1985, and below, smaller, a new line. All of them. There will be no speech, Walter told the gathering. There will be an introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, the chief executive of the Grace National Network, Emily Parker. She is 27. She began as a trainee behind the 6th window of this very branch, and one day she ran across this floor while 40 people stood still. That is everything you need to know about her qualifications. The rest is in the reports, and our reports these days are good. Emily stepped up to the plaque, in a fine suit with the same hastily gathered bun that 2 years of a leadership program had failed to defeat, and gave a short speech, out of which the newspapers quoted one sentence. This bank has abolished client categories, but one category we have kept and we guard it. People, all of them, with no minimum balance, no Form 210-B, and no timer. In the evening, when everyone had gone, the two of them remained on the floor, the new chief executive and the old founder. Walter stood by the 6th window and looked at the hall, the marble, the columns, the light from the tall windows. 42 years, a whole life, 2 coats. What are you thinking about? Asked Emily. About how, on a Monday, I was walked out of here by the elbow, said Walter. And it turned out I was being walked in. Doors are strange machinery, Miss Parker. You never know which way they truly open. He picked up his unfinished tea from the slow window, nodded to Rose's portrait above the hall. Her portrait hung opposite the entrance now, so that everyone coming in could see whose half of the bank had been switched back on, and headed for the doors. At the exit, the old man turned. As on that first day, he looked at the hall. The hall looked at him. Good bank, said Walter Grace. Use it well.